Susan, I don't know, did you want to start off the show?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, today we're sort of like going to maybe dwell on some principles of communicating in this space. And we've sort of titled this session Selling Sustainability because we love our little pop culture references. And, there was a show from a little while ago called Selling Sunset about these hella cool women who are selling the perfect lifestyle. And I think we should channel a little bit of that that look at this sexy, amazing thing. And sustainability probably needs to get to that same space with those levels. So we'll between Will and I, we're going to bounce between us and walk you through some concepts. So here we are. First, who are we? My name is Susan Diaz. I have a long background in advertising and corporate communications. And about 9 years ago, when my daughter was born, I decided I wasn't really into the corporate life. So I moved away, started to be a freelancer, got better and better at it, and then met Will about 4 years ago. And then, here we are. We are the co-hosts of the 4 a.m. Report podcast, which our question is, what keeps you up at night? Which is something that's ingrained itself in our entire business process, because how do you ask someone that question and not get some truth in return, right? So that's me. Will, I'll allow you to sort of introduce yourself as well, and then you can take them through the rest.
Yeah, so my name's Will Lamont. My background was more on the PR, media relations, that side of things, and I've segued more to the digital marketing side of things now. As Susan said, the 4 a.m. report, that's kind of become our calling card, this podcast that we do. You'll see from that image there that we do, as Natalie referred to in the introduction, we are a little cheeky. We poke fun at ourselves and do everything with a little bit of humor, which is one thing we found over the past year with so much digital clutter out there. When you bring some personality, some humor, something extra as opposed to just the inform. It's the inform and entertain. That's something that we have found that has really resonated and got us upped our visibility huge. So already, before we get into anything, I would say with all of your communication that you're doing, beyond just informing, think of how to bring a little bit of entertainment. Honestly, we're on our screens so much these days that little smile, that little nod, that little wink that you can bring to whatever you do makes you stand out. So that's something already that we're getting into there. But our agency, we're a small, agile, virtual team. We work with people all over the globe, actually, and we work on simplifying clients' marketing issues. So whatever challenge they have, we work with them to figure out simplified solutions to marketing gold, basically.
Yeah, so to set the stage for where we are, I mean, all the jokes about day 2,500 notwithstanding, we have been living this sort of pandemic lifestyle for coming up on 8 months right now. And there's a level of exhaustion and confusion, maybe even a realization in many people's minds that this is not probably going away in the 6 months like everyone thought it was at first. And there's, just dealing with that, living in a time of crisis. And then in June this year, while the anti-racism movement always existed, I guess it really fully picked up steam and came to the mainstream consciousness, let's say, thanks to a series of horrible things happening in the US. And so now that's what it's a crisis within a crisis for pretty much everybody in the world right now. And then, add to that your daily life, the things that go on, dealing with your kids in school and whatever. So essentially life today looks almost nothing like it did at the start of 2020. And that is something that we need to factor in as communicators, because complaining that people are not taking notice of a message has become a global complaint. Nobody's taking notice of anything anymore. Like, reaches have gone down. The concept of virality has not, I haven't heard it mentioned until we chatted earlier today. I haven't heard virality mentioned because it's not a given. You can't just do something cool and get noticed anymore. It needs to have deep consciousness. So to move on to the next part of it.
And Susan, I was going to say, and something we say too, it's the things that maybe were working last year aren't working now. one thing, while, you know, maybe you can't sell the way you were selling, maybe your industry has been affected, and you know, it's there's a, you know, it's, you're just not able to market the way you did market. There's
Yeah.
certain things that you can be doing, because what you want to be doing, and this is why marketing is more important than ever, good marketing, because even if you can't be selling to your customer the way you were selling, you still want to be nurturing and fostering that relationship, and still, you know, be top of mind for when maybe you are able to sell again, or whatever. So offering up kind of that no strings attached
Expertise, right? And
expertise,
yeah.
right? So one example that we say is ditch the opt-in, right? Like, so maybe you had an ebook that you were trying to gather email from, offering that up, no strings attached. Things like that are going to make you stand out, and are going to, it's going to help foster that relationship. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about that, Susan. You're pretty passionate about that.
Yeah, I think it's just that believing that, you know, selling in the front end, like generating leads, is no longer working. It's one of those things that you said, Will, where, you know, at one point you were like, throw up the opt-in, throw up a landing page, and then, you know, you'll suddenly have a list of thousands of people who are interested in what you have to offer. I think that time had passed even before COVID came along. And now with all of this clutter, like everybody literally, the mass exodus online, nobody really has the time or the headspace for stuff like that. And I don't know about you, but I'm deeply protective of my email. I don't need additional clutter added to my inbox. So I'm very, very specific about what I will sign up for. So yeah, that isn't something that is a good idea. What is a good idea though is creating that larger body of work, but distributing it differently, right? I mean, I know we're going to touch on this a little bit in detail further in the presentation, but really breaking it up into those bite-sized pieces, and then offering up that expertise for the sake of it. Like, I want to give you this information, and then you'll hear from me like 10 times, and then the 11th time you might actually need something that I have to offer, and that's when you'll think of me, because you already know who I am. So it is long game, and it is a bit intimidating for people not being able to measure at every step and be like, oh, I got 500 people on my list. Is a better way to measure marketing than being like, oh, in 6 months, let's see how our audience feels, right? It's a little less specific. So to go into, you know, the audiences that we're speaking to today, we would imagine that, you know, one of the biggest changes that's happened is that travel for work and play is just on pause. I mean, it's not that people aren't climbing back into the planes and going to places, but it isn't. I mean, somebody like my family, we deeply treasured our 2 or 3 vacations in a year. We put a lot of thought into it, and now this whole year, it's like I drove to Detroit in Feb, and that's it. That's my only international trip of the year, right? So when you look at things like that, it is a bit intimidating to be in this space and be like, how do I make my big message, which was to corporates about how they should be more environmentally conscious in their decision making, that just feels like an intimidating place to be communicating right now. So we feel you, is our point. We completely feel you. But the cool thing about being in this place is that when there was a metaphor that a podcast guest had, which we deeply loved, they talked about car racing and how when in a car race there's a crash, recovery from that crash is anybody's game. It doesn't matter what car you drive. It doesn't matter how good the driver is, who was slated to win. When you come out of the crash, if you're agile enough, you could win that race, right? So we're in that place. Some people can rise to that challenge, some people can't, but it's worth thinking about. A reset.
Right, and I think, as we've alluded to, setting the stage, right now is the time to be investing in digital infrastructure, right? Everybody, the digital shift, the shift to digital, even companies and groups that maybe hadn't really had a big digital presence in the past 7 months have had to quickly create that. So with this, there's way more people who are online on the platforms competing for space, right? So this goes back to, how do you stand out from the digital clutter? What are you investing in to make sure you can create communities and forums and relationships in this?
Right? Yeah. At one point, in the summer, when some of the rules were a bit more relaxed about where you could go and what you could do, I looked up a whole bunch of things to be like, can I go somewhere around the Niagara? Can we go to Prince Edward County? And I found it hard to find some of the smaller companies' information because their website hadn't changed at all from before the pandemic, and it required making like a telephone call to check in with them and ask questions. And I'd rather die than get on a phone. So I didn't actually go through that. But the bigger companies, you could clearly tell who had the budgets and the time and the bandwidth and the vision versus who didn't, because some basic information, I think we all should be getting to that point where we're like, here's our updated versions of ourselves. And again, we'll touch on that in some of the tips that we have for you on what you can do. But yeah, that's basically, everyone's online now. So Will, do you want to talk about this audience shift?
Yeah. So the other thing too is you need to re-examine who your target customer audience is. So we like to say your audience is the same, but they are not the same. So, and a really basic example of this is if you are marketing or selling to, say, a 40-year-old, corporate type manager who lives in downtown Toronto with 2 kids. Well, she's still now 7 months into this pandemic is still that same person. She still has that same job. She has 2 kids, she lives in downtown Toronto, but everything about her pain points, her stresses, her challenges, her wants, desires, they have all changed. So we call this re-examining the psychographics. So the emotionally intelligent marketer of 2020, goes beyond just the demographics. They're going to, take a look at what are her pain points, where is her head at, what's important now versus what was important before. This is a really important exercise to do because it's going to relate back to all of your messaging and communicating. Yeah.
100%. Yeah, and not a lot has changed. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Marketoonist cartoons from Tom Fishburne, and this has always been the case. It's like if you sit down there and you're like, what does brand loyalty mean as a team? We discuss it in a lot of marketing jargon and complicated to understand things. But in the end, if you look at the mind of a consumer, see what's there. It's like my husband, my kids, my friends, my career, all of these things, the dog. Nobody cares about your brand pickle. So you've got to know that that brand of pickle fits into like a decision somewhere else. Maybe it's your lunch decision on that tiny career bubble over there, right? So approaching it, like we said, from that deep understanding of the psychographics and knowing that on the surface of it, nothing's changed. That 40-year-old mom of 3 is still the 40-year-old mom of 3, but nothing about her life looks the same right now. So I mean, for us as marketers, I think there's a reason that marketers are probably shining in this time, because this is what you've tried to achieve over many decades. It hasn't fully happened, and now people are starting to see it. And I, for one, am excited about that.
So this brings us to, here's the opportunity, I think, right? So one of the things that might have changed for this 40-year-old mom is that she's realizing that she wants to align herself with brands and companies that take a stand, that have a stand on issues that are important to her, that are important to her society and her friends and her community as a whole. So there's a stat that it's a recent stat, 1/3 of consumers pick brands who focus on purpose over profit. This is wonderful to hear for people in the sustainability and environmental friendly kind of industry. People want to hear this messaging. They want to know that the decisions they make are decisions that involve sustainability. Yeah.
And again, to add to that for a second, Will, I mean, you've got to niche your audience down. You've got to get to that place where you're like, this 30% of my audience really deeply cares about this. So focus on them. Trying to focus on everyone and just hoping someone will come through, it is not the greatest of ideas. It's so much better when you narrow it down to being like, this is the type of individual is most likely to resonate with this. So really sweat that audience thing, which is why we're sweating it right now while we're talking you through this. Is it's almost like if you get one thing right, get those pain points, and then the rest of it will tend to fall into place a little bit more easy easily. But yeah, in terms of like, some actionable things that you can do. So now, great, we've told you some macro 30,000 foot concepts, but how does that break down into your daily operations, right? So, just again, Natalie said we're cheeky, so we find some of these cheeky things tend to cut the clutter. So really, it's these are the 5 sort of key things that we're seeing people getting wrong, the 5 F-ups, if you will, that even 8 months into this, like, people are still making. The first of them is your homepage, like the website of your company. And I know in some companies' cases, it's complex. There are 3 or 4 portions to it. But the key web property that you promote with is like your home address. It's like your front, it's your curb appeal. It's how people know what you stand for. And if that looks exactly the same as it did pre-pandemic, and it hasn't really got any additional info in there that people are looking for, then that needs to be fixed, like, promptly. And
exactly. And Susan, I was just gonna add in there, Susan, it is like you said, it's going back to the psychographics. If your website and messaging isn't reflecting what's important to your audience now, for instance, maybe it's like supporting my local economy is important, making sure that whatever I choose is done in a safe way to keep myself and my family safe, that sort of thing. Really addressing those pain points and bringing them up front, answering those pain points up front is essential. Go ahead, Susan. Sorry to interrupt.
No, absolutely. That's very important, Will. Thanks for that. It's also thinking about not complicating it. Like, don't get into this, like, oh, this is the brand architecture. This has to be approved at this level. We can't make changes on our website without 8,000 people looking at it. You really have to streamline that and find some ways that like the key things are fixed. And the big tip we can give you at this point is, like, don't try to do it all. Like, make small additions, like change one section of it to clearly articulate what it says. Maybe do that way up front if that's necessary. I know a few brands did additions where they put a bar over the top where they were like, this is our COVID update. But now that time's gone as well. Just a COVID update isn't important. Like, what is your intention for the way forward? What is your recovery plan? That's what people want to know, the hope, the growth, that kind of thing. The second one is, how you're spending your leadership time in your communication and messaging. I mean, whether you're a solo operation or like a large company with like a big management team, your leadership really needs to be out there, whether it's LinkedIn or podcasts or videos or whatever it is. Just given that in-person events are sort of like the way people did it before, which is like, go to these giant conferences, there's thousands of people at it, they all met and hobnobbed and did deals. That whole thing's gone. So with that disappearing, regardless of your industry, I think it's important to translate that into whatever. And again, here's where it's worth spending a moment to see what the genuine interest of the person concerned is. And that, again, sounds like it's taking time and it's customized. But if one of your leaders is better on LinkedIn commenting on people's things, then let them do that. If another leader is excellent at showing up on videos and interviewing, then that's good too. So really picking that thing and staying in touch with your audiences. I think the third one is what we touched on heavily, which is that you've got to convey your commitment to purpose over profit, right? I mean, people care about that. And in many brands' cases, that's really never been a thing, where you're now having to put a lens on it and be like, what are our thoughts about, racism, or what are our thoughts about anything else? There's having to define that. But in the case of people in the environmental space, you've already got that point. You've got your deep purpose over profit in front of you, and people need to be seeing that, and that needs to be factored into everything up front, which means that, if you have a website, start talking about the importance of this, like, in sentence one, as opposed to adding it as an add-on at the end in the case of travel and stuff like that. The last is budgets. Like, if we had to be honest about the biggest objection that most people have to marketing, it is, oh, I don't have the budget for that, or I don't have the budget for this activity. But that's probably been intensified like tenfold during COVID, right? but I'm going to call people out on that. That's just a bluff because you're lazy. You need to come up with ways of being like, this is not how we're spending our budget anymore from 2019 to 2020. It's changed. So you really have to think of it as a line item, take the emotion out of it. It's like, this money is not being spent here, so take it out, and where are you going to spend it instead? And that's how innovation comes about, is when your back is against the wall and you need to do something. And then the last is audits. And Will, maybe you can talk a bit about this, because I know you're deeply passionate about audits. And
it's true. I do. I love to minimize the amount of new work that one has to do. So by doing this is a great time to do a content audit. Look at everything that you have, digital properties, reports you've put out, all of your digital content, give it a nice rinse through, and look at the metrics, see what worked, see what people resonated with, do the full audit, and then repurpose. This is like a great opportunity to rinse new messaging through what you've been doing, and reuse, repurpose. You don't need to reinvent the wheel here. You've probably got a lot of good content. It's just a matter of, rejigging it for the tone that's necessary for right now in fall of 2020. So the content audit is something that we are huge on. And when we first start working with people, Susan, right, the first thing we do is we want to dive into what they have and reorganize it and see how we can reuse it. So that's the fifth in the if you're not doing that, that's one of the 5 F ups, as we say. And then here we have, no, you go ahead, Susan.
Go ahead.
I know, I was just going to say, this is kind of a nice simplified version of our take on modern marketing, which is about establishing a voice, establishing trust, and amplifying it. So over to you, Susan, I'll let you explain.
Yeah, I think, again, this is really to recap what we've been touching on so far, which is like, it needs to come through to people clearly what you stand for, and when we say voice, it's the actual depth and content of what you've got to say, your messaging, your purpose, like we said. And then it's also that, that personality, which is a bit of humor. Again, not everyone needs to go all the way to where we've gone, which is, images of day drinking and, jokes about all kinds of things. That's our voice. But for some people, it might be wit, it might be speed at which you come back with something. There's all kinds of ways in which you can establish a personality. So that's what we mean by voice. So purpose and personality. Trust is, again, deep knowledge beyond demographics. Like, people will only trust you if you've taken a minute to get to know who they are and understand what matters to them. Think about it in friendship terms. Nobody wants to be friends with that person who just comes to you with their problems and doesn't care about what you have to say at all, right? The conversation has to be two-sided. And then amplification. This, I think, like, people love to create. There's something sexy about creating, but it's not necessarily the same way when you have to distribute it. Like, oh, I already put out that blog post, or I already put out that video, I don't want to do it again. That's counterintuitive, but you really should, because imagine how many people are online. What are the chances of you getting to all of them at the same time? So you really have to keep distributing more and more. And this is why we like to talk about the flywheel, which we'll explain in a second. It's my apologies, I'm trying to time myself. It's Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, in which we talk about the idea of a flywheel. And this is a thought leadership example of it, which is, don't start everything like we did before, which was, you have a launch date, everything has to be ready, and then you go all guns blazing, and then what? Nothing. You've got to keep it going. So really, we start over here with the Venn diagram over on the right hand side, where it's like, have a perspective. And we like to be a little extra cheeky here. We're like, you've got to have a real strong perspective, but then don't be like a horrible person. Be kind about it, because you need to bring that into it. Then build a body of work. Often you find people being like, oh, this thing I wrote didn't get picked up, or nobody cared about it. Well, that's because you haven't got a solid set of proof points and a lot of content to your name, which people know. Because if it's a flash in the pan, no one's going to care, even if you spent thousands of dollars building it. So you've got to keep putting it. And usually when we say body of work, again, it goes back to your website. Make sure that there's a robust section of things in your website that people can review. Then comes the brand voice. And like we said, kind equals clever. Like, don't get lost like many influencers do in that path of just self-importance where you forget that you need to be really kind to people. Obviously, the key messaging of it, which is what is your unique value proposition? And that is something that's a lifetime job. I think you chip away at this over and over again. For every brand, it needs to keep evolving. Then comes the pitch and the placement. Don't forget that you've got to be out there on other people's properties as much as you are on yours. Expecting everyone to come to you is kind of foolish, because you're missing out on many opportunities. It's the reason we're here having this conversation in this forum, is you've got to go out and get your voice out there. And then the last part is you've got to have the analytics. I mean, it's getting more and more complex, because sure, you can make a case for anything saying it's working, but what are the, that's why we're saying not metrics, but analytics and insights that come from it. That's what you want in this whole thing. And then you do it all over again. And as you build it, each circle of this flywheel is going to keep taking you further and further in the
the one thing about the flywheel, as Susan's alluding to, once you start getting momentum, it's going to speed up and it's going to become easier, and it's going to become almost that it'll start rotating on its own. But again, you've got to put in the work at the beginning to get that to first start churning. And one of the biggest mistakes people make is that beginning to get the flywheel to start turning, it takes a little while, and then they abandon that idea and they move to something else. And this is, as Natalie, I see her nodding here with us, she knows that's called a doom loop. When you don't really, lean into the one concept and really put the effort into it, and you just keep abandoning and trying different things, you're not doing a flywheel. Collins calls that a doom loop. And so that's what you want to avoid. You really have to give your idea, what you're trying to communicate, a chance to take hold. And if you kind of follow these steps, you're going to start to see that positive movement. But again, it's going to take a little time, and then but before you know it, it's going to start turning on its own. And then we go to, this is something we call the anchor theory of content marketing. And you'll see we've somehow created a nice little fishing metaphor here. Or maritime metaphor, I will call it, where this is basically a way to distribute your content, and it's a way to distribute it efficiently, and also make sure that you're penetrating in all the areas you want to be doing. So the anchor could be anything, right? So for us, we do a podcast every week called the 4 a.m. Report. That's our anchor piece of content. So, that would be the anchor there. Then what we do is we take that podcast episode, we get the transcript. The transcript becomes a blog post. It becomes several little smaller written posts. You could pull out some quotes and use those and put those out on your social channels. We also rip tinier audio clips from our podcast, and we put those out as teasers that direct back to the podcast. We also have a series of different images and promo images that we use that relate back to the podcast. So basically, that one piece of content that you invest time in, believe it really does exude your values, can be spun into so many different types of things. And a lot of people don't do this. They don't reuse the content they create enough. Like Susan always says, you get sick of it way before everybody else will even see it. So make sure that you don't abandon that one anchor piece of content. Keep reusing it, repurposing it. Try to cover your different types of media, audio, visual, video, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and at one point this was like the secret of agencies, and they hid it in like, vaults and didn't tell anyone about it. But now this is a part of the democratization of content. Everyone's a publishing house, and you should know this. And this is the way that, not everyone can get to this level of complexity on day one, where you're able to achieve all of it. But that's why the flywheel is like, start somewhere and keep building it slowly as you go. It's going to feel really, really hard if this is the first foray into something like that. But then, eventually, if this becomes a way of thinking, I think it helps.
And to relate to perhaps something that a lot of people are familiar with, like an ebook or a report on the state of the industry in 2020. Those are things that people produce that could be an anchor piece of content. And from that, think of all the different things you could pull, quotes that are in there. You could take just sections out and post those and link back to the actual full ebook. also get on video. You know, DIY video is king and easy to do these days. You can talk about some of the basic concepts from the report in a series of video clips that you could produce, like little short 1-minute videos. There's so many things you could do. So that's the anchor theory there. And then Susan, I'll let you talk about the unplug and play calendar.
Yeah, we originally created this calendar for a few reasons. We used to call them the 3 C's or the 4 C's. It was essentially to create consistency. Sometimes it's easy to create stuff and be like, okay, I've published that book one time. Now, what do I do for the remaining 29 days of the month? Well, you break it up. So we've got a little key here that we sort of use. Obviously, this can change from person to person, but there's roughly this idea of like, you know, have tips and tricks, have, you know, little things about your industry that you take people back to your home base for. Only create on some days. So if you look at that little paintbrush thing, there's only one of the 5 days of the week where we recommend that you create. For the rest of the time, you're going to be utilizing what you have all the time, right? Which is not what many people do. And then, you know, repurposing the stuff that you've already done in a different format, making sure to include audio and video and images, because while we certainly don't recommend that you chase after social algorithms or worry yourself about that stuff, it does help to have material in different, what we call rich media, which is essentially audio, video, graphics, and the written form. So the more you're doing that consistently across the week, the more you're likely to show up as a quality producer of content. So it has less to do with manipulating the algorithm and more to do with establishing your cred as a quality producer of content. And again, like Will said, you know, I keep repeating this like a litany. You're going to be bored so much before anyone else is going to be bored. So just keep releasing it over and over again. And, you know, having a clear calendar again is not news to many, but making sure it is put into practice and utilized regularly is like, it's like discipline. It's like learning to get on a workout regime and sticking with it.
Yeah. And also if there is something that you naturally just don't love doing, but you know you want to do and should do, having it scheduled. You know, for instance, we have Thursday videos that we schedule that we do every Thursday, regardless if we've got an idea for it or not. We figure out something to do and we do it. And again, that's just that consistency, that showing up, that imprinting on your audience. That's so important. And a scheduled calendar will really help you do that and stay true to it.
What's that thing we like to say, Will? Thursday at 4 means Thursday at 4, not Thursday-ish, not 4-ish.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
exactly.
You know, you really want to stick with it.
Yeah, and I think that brings us to the end of our quick overview there. This is just, you know, if you go to our website, cp.digital, you can find lots of stuff about us and check out our podcast and that sort of thing. But Natalie, I think that we've maybe gone a little over our time there, but
that's okay. I have 3 pages of notes. Thank you so much. I, you know, follow you guys. I was in your book club. Yes, I'm familiar with the doom loop and the flywheel, and but every time I learn. No mention of hedgehogs. Disappointing. You know, it's Tuesday.
We didn't want to steal all of Jim Collins' book.
Exactly. So that was incredible. I wanted to maybe just ask you about 3 things that I sort of picked up as we went on. That was, I'm going to call them the 3 I's that we sort of struggle with. And the first is innovation. So the climate emergency, we are in the middle of a crisis, but it's a crisis that unfolds over a very long timeline.
Right.
And so the science is a little bit unknown. It can be difficult to communicate because the layperson doesn't always understand. And it's sort of, if I could give a poor analogy, it's like that person who looks up WebMD and then goes to the doctor with a list. And so there's a lot of sort of battling what people think is good, like recycling, versus, you know, cutting things off earlier. And so that sense of innovation can be very hard to sort of communicate. The second thing is the immediacy, right? So it's sort of like we need to act immediately, but we won't see the results of our actions for some time. And so there needs to be, speaking to your psychographics, some kind of payoff for people in order to have them continue that action. And then the third is really, and I think you've addressed this in many ways as you talk about authenticity and voice, and that is integrity, because we suffer from something called greenwashing in our industry, where you know, we've come up with this great program, but there's no independent verification, and sort of those are difficult things to communicate, or it can be very frustrating for people doing them right, as they are outspoken in the marketplace by people who are maybe not being as high integrity. So thoughts and wisdom on those items.
Yeah, sure. I can get started. We'll pitch in as you want, but let me just try to go one at a time. So on the innovation front, I guess this is where it becomes important to really, I guess, focus on that purpose, being like, okay, here's the overall message. But sometimes things can get a little lost in the science. Things can get a little lost in something that isn't instant gratification, like you said, with the immediacy. So I think knowledge translation is pretty important, like breaking down some of those bigger concepts into small messages of like, what is something that I can do right now? Like, what is something that I can do every day over the next 10 years and truly reverse something? You know, those kind of things where you translate it down to an understandable, actionable for people, because in the end, everyone's a person. You know, it's not corporate decisions or political decisions or whatever. It's about getting your people to see the sense. And then again, you know, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, it flywheels, right? You have to keep going with it. On the immediacy front, I think rewards in some way for good behavior, as you do with any sort of habit forming. Because again, like we said, this is a delayed gratification thing in many ways. It's like we all want to do better, but if I had to pick between doing that or something else in the moment, what is my compelling reason to do this, right? So any kind of reward structure, and it doesn't have to be monetary. It can completely be, you know, emotional in some way. And I guess that will need some breaking down for each person for how that applies. But I think people do respond to that in a learning phase, which is really what we're at right now. We're in a learning phase of this, which is unfortunate, but we're still there. And then the last one, you know, you're setting yourself apart from the greenwashers. I guess that works both ways, right? I mean, there are going to be some people who make these decisions because it looks good on paper. There are going to be some people who make the decisions because if not, somebody will call them out. And that's okay. If that's how you come to the table, then welcome anyway. You're going to stay for the food. Anything you want to add, Will?
No, I agree completely. I think there's, you know, the two types of people that you'd be talking to, right? The ones who really want to do this because they know it's the right thing to do. And then there's, as Susan alluded to, those people who are like, well, I know in this climate, I probably should show that I'm doing something good. And I would say, like Susan said, like, great, we welcome even that motivation, because that's one step towards becoming that other person. And I think, you know, people want to also show off that they're, you know, whether this is a good thing or not, like, you know, if I'm making good decisions, I want a little pat on the back from my team and around me as well. So enabling people to feel proud and giving them something that they can show off about them making the right decision as well is further encouragement to bring people into this world. So
yeah. So to break that down for digital properties, like what does that mean? If it sounds too big to comprehend at this point, it's like even little coupons and things that come to you, like with praise, you get those badges, you know, with things where you're like, you do the same thing 10 times, like you get a badge or whatever it might be. There are people who collect that stuff. Like I like to think about things like in terms of how children approach it. And my child probably loves getting some of those stickers and badges so much more than a trip to the toy store. I mean, she'll take that any day.
But you know, it doesn't matter whether it's Audible or your pedometer or whatever. You're always saying, oh, if I just did 1,000 more steps, I get this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You know, it's fun to kind of gamify those things, and that's something that we strive to do now that we're on digital platforms. You guys are always like, now I have 4 pages of notes.
I love it.
I'll try not to, you know, attack it all at once. Susan, you have graciously agreed to talk to us and the audience on Friday, October 23rd, headlining the communication, because if we do all this great work and we don't get it communicated to the people of the world, then it's a bit of a wasted effort, and you're going to have to do that. So I would encourage everybody to reach out to them. What platform are you most? I see you guys on LinkedIn, but what platforms really?
I'm a LinkedIner. I tend to spend most of my time on there. A few months ago, I made a decision to go off of Facebook and Instagram because I was, again, this is taking a stand in my little way. I decided I was over Zuckerberg and his racist ways. And so that's what I did. So here I am on LinkedIn, which has done a great thing. May I make a quick aside? It's done a great thing for me in terms of focus, because it means it's one channel. I put a lot of effort into it, and then you can see the result as opposed to spreading yourself thin. So LinkedIn, long-winded answer to tell you that.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I know, but a valuable lesson. And also, you know, you sort of give us, you're the expert in this field. So you sort of give people like me who, you know, I get shamed into going into Instagram, and like my photography skills are not great. I'm better having a conversation. So, you know, you sort of give us an easy out. I'm going to just tell Candace now. It's like Susan said, it's okay if I
It's okay. You just need permission.
There you go.
I'm completely there with you. And so, Will, thank you so much. Susan, thank you. Now, before we let you go, there's always one thing, and I didn't prep you for this before. What is the one sustainable thing that you try to do that's sort of your little action for the earth?
I can go first. I'm heavily for years and years. I don't know what to do with paper. I don't know what to do with printouts of things. I've been online for like ever. Like I said, even things like taking my car and going somewhere is not something that crosses my mind. I try to do most things I mean, sure, there's other things that go wrong because I think about the packaging and stuff that comes to me and I'm like, oh my God, I'm destroying the world single-handedly. But then I try to think about the fact that there's so much less on the other front. So I definitely do that. I try to practice my usual habits, and because I have a 9-year-old, I learn with her what some of these responsible habits are. So
you might be interested to know, actually, we were talking before we started, you're vegetarian. And reducing meat consumption is actually #1 according to Dry.
Oh, well, there you go.
Well, there we go.
So, you know, you're absolutely. You were doing good. You didn't even know it. So there you go. And Will, what's sort of your?
Well, just and you know, as on the day that we're recording this, interestingly enough, it's one of Amazon's Amazon Prime days, which encourages everyone just to buy lots of things on Amazon. And over the weekend, I saw, or maybe it was at the end of early last week, the CBC, David Common, I saw him do a report on the return process for Amazon and how much stuff that you return, because it's so easy to return, you just stick the label on, send it back, how much of that actually goes into landfills and is just wasted, like perfectly good stuff. It's easier and cheaper for them to ditch it and throw it away as opposed to repackage and repurpose. So it was a really eye-opening piece for me on the wastefulness of this company that's making billions and billions of dollars right now and how irresponsible they're being. So check that out if you haven't seen it yet. So what that's made me do as of yesterday, I'm like, I don't need anything from Amazon right now. And if I do need something, I'm going to try to find it from a local supplier. So that's just one little thing that piece actually did have impact on me. And I told lots of friends about it and tried to guilt them into not shopping today. So there we go.
That is really interesting. I didn't realize that. We don't tend to use a ton of things. Sometimes my son is in computer science, and sometimes there's a finicky little piece. It's the best place. But our neighbors took that stand about a year ago, but I never asked why. They just said for environmental reasons that they choose.
Yeah, I was shocked about how much they they actually did an investigative report where they tracked
Wow.
stuff that was returned, and they watched it go from one place to another to this like weird kind of whatever, then end up in a landfill. It was very eye-opening, the amount of stuff that just goes to waste. So yeah.
Which is why I'm going to shout out to a Canadian company who's doing it well, and one that I switched to a while ago was well.ca for many of the usual things that I would go to Amazon for. And if at all you have a return, they will tell you to keep it and pass it on to someone, so that you're saving on you know,
Wow.
the shipping, as well as you get to, like, you know, give someone else something.
Wow, it goes back to that purpose, right? They have a higher purpose. And I've never seen anybody's bank balance on their tombstone. So, you know, it should tell us a little bit about how we should, Well, you have it's Tuesday morning right after Thanksgiving, and you guys have just set my week up to be fantastic. Always enjoy hearing from you guys. And thank you. And Susan, we are so excited to hear from you next week.
I look forward to it.
Please be well. We have so many things to be thankful, and I am just thankful that there are communicators like you guys out there, and that you're willing to help us get this message out. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. Thank you
for having us.